Title: Echo Ridge, Shadows of a Small Town. The night she disappeared. Echo Ridge was a quiet little town nestled in the forests of northern Washington. People knew each other by name, and front doors were often left unlocked at night. But one evening, everything changed. It was 11:43 p.m. Rain poured steadily from the sky. 17-year-old Lily Marshall was walking home after staying late at the local learning center. She had her headphones in, listening to her favorite playlist, when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned. No one was there. That moment would be the last time anyone saw her. The next morning, Lily's mother reported her missing. Her phone was dead, and the trail of her footprints vanished near the edge of the woods. A search was launched, but there were no clues. The peace of Echo Ridge shattered overnight. Suspicions at school. At Echo Ridge High School, students were panicking. Lily had been popular, smart, and beloved by teachers. Her disappearance shocked everyone, except a few, especially not her ex-boyfriend, Zach Taylor, the most mysterious, most disliked guy in school. Zach was a loner. He always carried an old camera and preferred to sit alone in the far corner of the library. Rumors swirled that he was making a missing persons list. But were those just rumors? The old photo. After Lily went missing, the police questioned Zach. But with no solid evidence, he was released. That same evening, Zach's mother was cleaning out old photo albums when she stumbled upon a strange picture. A photo of a girl who looked exactly like Lily. But the photo was dated 2003. Lily hadn't even been born yet. On the back of the photo, one sentence was scribbled: Echo Ridge will return. Was it just a coincidence? In the upcoming parts, the mystery of girls who vanished 20 years ago resurfaces. A hidden room beneath the school is discovered. Zach's true identity is revealed. Sinister events buried in the town's forest history are uncovered. And in the finale, Lily is found, but she's not the same Lily anymore. Whispers in the woods. The search for Lily stretched into its fourth day. Volunteers combed through the wet forest, their flashlights cutting through the misty air. Dogs barked as if they had caught a scent, but every lead ended in nothing. Sheriff Daniels, a broad-shouldered man with 20 years on the force, stood near the edge of the woods with a grim face. He had seen missing persons cases before, but something about this one felt wrong. The forest was silent in a way that was almost unnatural, as if it were holding its breath. That evening, Zach Taylor walked alone to the tree line. He had ignored the curfew. The rain had stopped, but the soil was still wet and soft. He crouched and ran his fingers through the mud, tracing something, a faint footprint, too small to belong to a man. It pointed deeper into the woods. Then he heard it, a whisper. Lily. Zach froze. His heart slammed against his ribs. He spun around. No one was there. The whisper came again, floating through the mist, soft and almost pleading. He stumbled back, nearly tripping over a gnarled tree root. When he returned home, his hands were shaking. In his room, he opened the old camera and scrolled through photos. Most were just empty hallways, leaves, abandoned houses, but the last picture made his blood run cold. It was a shot of the forest he had taken the night before. In the far corner of the frame, half hidden by trees, stood a figure. A girl. She was barefoot. Her hair clung to her face, wet and matted. Her dress, Lily's dress, was torn, and she was smiling. But her eyes were completely black. The first sign. The next morning, Echo Ridge woke to an eerie fog blanketing the entire town. The local news was already buzzing about the missing girl, and reporters' vans lined the main street. Sheriff Daniels had stationed extra deputies by the forest entrance, but no one wanted to enter anymore. Even the search dogs whined and refused to go in. Zach didn't sleep that night. He couldn't stop staring at the photo on his camera, the girl with black eyes, smiling in the darkness. He knew he should turn it over to the police, but some instinct told him they wouldn't believe him. Maybe they would even blame him. Instead, he decided to go back to the woods. By midday, he reached the same clearing where he had heard the whispers. This time, the fog was thick, curling around the trees like pale smoke. He heard water dripping from the branches, the distant caw of a crow, and then, suddenly, something soft brushed his shoulder. He spun around. A ribbon hung from a low branch, fluttering gently. Pale blue, the same color Lily had been wearing the night she disappeared. Zach's fingers trembled as he reached for it. The fabric was damp, but warm, as if it had been touched only moments ago. Then he heard it again. Zach! He froze. The whisper was right beside his ear this time. His breath caught as the fog thickened, forming a faint silhouette in front of him. A girl's outline, wet hair, torn dress, bare feet on the muddy ground. Lily. His voice shook. The figure tilted her head slowly, unnaturally, and for just a second he saw her eyes, completely black like the photo. Before he could move, she whispered, "Why did you leave me here?" Zach stumbled backward, his foot catching on a root. By the time he scrambled up, the fog cleared just enough to show the figure was gone. In his hand, he was still clutching the ribbon. And on the tree trunk in front of him, something had been carved overnight. 3 jagged words. She is mine. Something in Echo Ridge. News of Zach's experience didn't reach anyone, because he told no one. Who would believe him? That Lily was alive, but changed? That she had black eyes and whispered his name from the fog? It sounded insane, even to him. But he wasn't the only one seeing things. At Echo Ridge Elementary, a teacher named Ms. Holloway stayed after school grading papers. Around 5 p.m., she went to lock the back door of the gym. When she turned, she saw a girl standing at the edge of the playground, soaked, barefoot, unmoving. She called out. No answer. The girl tilted her head. Ms. Holloway later told the police the child vanished when the lights flickered. When they reviewed the school's security footage, there was nothing. No girl. No figure. Only a black screen with flickers and static at exactly 5:07 p.m. Across town, strange symbols began appearing. Carved into tree trunks, scrawled in chalk across the high school lockers, etched in dew across car windows. Always the same shape, a circle with a line through the center and 2 dots like eyes. Some called it vandalism. Others whispered the word. Marking. Meanwhile, Zach couldn't stay quiet any longer. He went to the only person he thought might believe him. Emma Raines, Lily's best friend. She had been avoiding everyone, blaming herself for convincing Lily to walk home that night. Zach showed her the picture. Emma went pale. That's her. That's Lily. He nodded slowly. But look at her eyes. Emma shook her head. That's not Lily anymore. Together, they went to the clearing. Emma didn't believe in ghosts. She didn't believe in monsters. But when she saw the tree, the message, "She is mine," now bleeding sap as if the letters had been cut that morning, she believed something was terribly, horribly wrong. And from deep in the woods, they heard a laugh. Soft, feminine, not human. The Echo Ridge packed. The laughter echoed through the trees, chilling Emma and Zach to the bone. They didn't speak, they ran. Branches clawed at their clothes. Mud splashed up their legs, but neither dared look back. Not until they burst out of the woods and onto the cracked pavement behind Emma's house. For a long moment, they just stood there, gasping. Then Emma turned to Zach. "We need help," she whispered. That night, Emma went into her grandmother's attic. Her grandmother, Evelyn Raines, had lived in Echo Ridge her entire life. She was nearly 90 now, blind in one eye, always whispering things under her breath that no one paid attention to. Emma had dismissed her stories for years, of the pact of the forest bride, of how Echo Ridge was never built on clean ground. But now, Emma wasn't so sure. In the attic, she found a cedar chest with rusted iron latches. Inside were newspaper clippings, yellowed letters, and a dusty leather-bound journal titled, "The Price of Silence, 1905. Emma's hand shook as she opened the book. The entries were written in jagged script, penned by a teenage girl named Margaret Wells, a name she recognized from the town's Main Street plaque, Founder's Daughter. The first entry read, October 13th, 1905, they made the pact last night. 7 men. They buried her beneath the roots of the oldest tree. She begged them not to. They said she was cursed. But I know the truth. We are. Zach leaned over her shoulder, reading every word. They buried who? Emma flipped forward. The drawings in the journal grew darker. Faces with hollow eyes. Trees with mouths. A girl in a dress. reaching from the ground with blackened fingers. Then they reached the last page. No writing, just a sketch. A circle, a line through the center, and two black eyes. The same symbol appearing all over town. Suddenly, they heard a sound outside the attic window, a creaking, like weight shifting on a tree branch. Zach turned. His voice was barely a whisper. "Emma, she's watching us." Emma stepped toward the window. Just beyond the yard, beneath the dying maple tree, stood Lily. Still, silent, smiling. The forest bride. The sight of Lily standing under the maple tree froze Emma in place. The fog curled around her like ghostly fingers, and the smile on her face was too wide, too still, like it had been painted there. Zach whispered, "Don't move." But before Emma could react, Lily slowly tilted her head back. Her black eyes glinted in the moonlight, and a low humming sound filled the night. Not quite a song, not quite a whisper. The attic grew colder, their breath fogging the air. Then, without warning, Lily turned and walked toward the woods, disappearing into the mist. Emma slammed the attic window shut. Her hands were shaking. That wasn't her. That wasn't Lily anymore. Zach nodded, then opened the old journal again. Near the middle, a pressed leaf slipped out. On it, written in faded ink, "The forest bride takes the ones we fail to protect." Beneath it was another line, half erased. "She returns them, but never the same." Emma's voice trembled. The forest bride, that's her. That's what Grandma always said lived in these woods. They sacrificed someone, a girl, and now she takes ours. A sudden thud shook the attic. They both jumped. Footsteps. On the roof. Zach slowly moved toward the dusty window facing the front yard. In the pale glow of the street lamp, he saw a hand, small, pale, and wet, gripping the edge of the shingles. Another followed. Then a face rose into view, upside down against the glass. Lily. Her wet hair hung like black ropes, water dripping on a glass. She opened her mouth, but instead of words, a horrible gurgling sound came out. Then she mouthed, "Let me in." Emma screamed and yanked the curtain shut. They bolted from the attic, heartbeats thundering in their ears, and locked themselves in the basement. Through the floorboards above, the sound of footsteps pacing slowly across the wooden floor echoed. And faintly, through the walls, the same chilling whisper floated down. "She is mine, and so are you." What the forest bride wants. The basement was dark, lit only by the dim glow of Emma's phone. Dust swirled in the stale air. Above them, the footsteps moved from room to room, slow, deliberate, almost playful. Zach leaned against the cement wall, whispering, "She's not trying to break in. She wants us scared." Emma hugged herself. "It's working." Then the sound stopped. The silence was worse than the footsteps. They waited, holding their breath. Minutes crawled by. Emma finally risked a glance at the narrow basement window that faced the backyard. Fog pressed against the glass from outside, curling like smoke. And then, two handprints appeared on the other side of the glass. Small, wet. Emma grabbed Zach's arm. "She knows we're down here." The old journal still lay open in Emma's lap. She flipped to the very last page, the one with the symbol. In the faint light, she noticed tiny handwriting around the edge of the page she hadn't seen before. "The bride does not take without reason. She collects what was promised to her. Blood for silence. A daughter for a daughter." Zach read it aloud, his voice cracking. "A daughter for a daughter." The basement door creaked. Both of them froze. Then they heard Grandma Evelyn's voice, thin and shaky, calling from the top of the stairs. "Emma, she's here for me." Emma's blood ran cold. "Grandma." Footsteps descended slowly. But it wasn't Evelyn. A bare, muddy foot appeared on the first step. Then another. Zach grabbed Emma's hand and yanked her toward the old storm doors that led outside. They shoved them open and stumbled into the night air, sprinting into the fog. Behind them, the basement door slammed, and a scream, half human, half something else, ripped through the night. When they reached the street, the town seemed wrong. Every street lamp flickered. Porch lights blinked in a slow, uneven rhythm. And across the town square, carved into the side of the old clock tower, glowed that same circle with two black eyes. Emma panted. She doesn't just want Lily. She wants the whole town. Zack nodded, chest heaving. She wants what Echo Ridge owes her. From the forest, the wind carried a voice, clearer than ever, soft as a lullaby. One of you is already mine. The first victim. By dawn, the fog had thinned, but the terror remained. Echo Ridge felt like a different town now, the kind that held its breath and waited for something awful to happen. The trees were too quiet. The wind whispered names no one dared repeat. Emma and Zack hadn't slept. They spent the night at the old community library, hiding in the archives. They flipped through town records, trying to trace the legend of the Forest Bride. What they found chilled them to the bone. In the 1800s, Echo Ridge wasn't even called Echo Ridge. It had been a small settlement named Gallows Hollow, and it had a dark, buried past, one the town had erased. A young woman, Eliza Thorne, had been accused of witchcraft by 7 prominent men, all founders of the town. She wasn't a witch. She was pregnant out of wedlock, and they feared scandal. So they dragged her into the forest and buried her alive beneath an ancient ash tree, performing a mock ritual to cleanse the land. But Eliza hadn't died quietly. According to a letter buried in the back of an 1874 diary, her last words were, "I will return for what is owed." And she had. She became the Forest Bride, a spirit who demanded retribution. And now, over a century later, Echo Ridge was built on broken promises and unpaid debts. That morning, the first death occurred. It was Principal Harding, a man known for his stern nature and long ties to the town council. His body was found outside the school, standing upright, frozen stiff, both eyes solid black. No wounds, no blood, just a smile carved across his face with something sharp, the kind of smile Lily wore. On his forehead, burned into the flesh, was the bride's symbol. The news sent panic through the town. Sheriff Daniels tried to keep things quiet, but the town's group chat exploded. Whispers of curses, of demons, of Echo Ridge being haunted from its roots. Emma and Zack knew this was only the beginning. At Lily's old locker, Emma found a folded note that hadn't been there the day before. No one saw who put it there. It read, "You can't save them all. One for each secret." Emma looked at Zack. She's picking them off, one by one. The ones tied to the past, to the lies. Zack nodded grimly. And we're next. Suddenly, every light in the school flickered, and from down the hall, a wet, dragging footstep echoed. Then came the whisper, low, feminine, ancient. "Bring me the girl who reads the journal." Bloodlines of Echo Ridge. The whisper coiled through the empty hallway like smoke. Emma clutched the leather journal to her chest, her pulse hammering in her ears. Zack grabbed her arm, whispering, "She knows about the book. She knows about you." They ducked into the janitor's closet, the air thick with dust and bleach. Through the crack in the door, they could see the flickering hallway. The dragging footsteps drew closer, wet, deliberate, leaving muddy prints on the polished floor. Then the footsteps stopped. A shadow passed under the doorframe. A hand, small, pale, and dripping water, pressed against the closet door. Fingernails scraped slowly down the wood, leaving marks. Emma held her breath. Then the whisper came again, right at the door. "The Rains family owes me most of all." Emma nearly dropped the journal. Her family. Her grandmother Evelyn had always told stories about the forest, about the woman who waits, but Emma had never imagined it was because her bloodline was tied to the original sin of Echo Ridge. When the footsteps finally faded, Zack pushed open the door. "We can't hide. We need answers. Real ones." They ran out of the school and headed straight for Evelyn Rain's house. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the air smelled of damp earth and smoke. The old woman was sitting in her rocker, staring at the wall with her one good eye. Before Emma could speak, Evelyn rasped, "She's awake now. I told them she would come for us." Emma knelt beside her. "Grandma, what did our family do?" The old woman's hands shook as she reached for the journal. "My grandmother, Margaret, the girl who wrote this, she was there the night they buried Eliza. She begged her father not to do it, but she didn't stop him. None of us did. And when the first girl went missing, my grandmother carved the circle and eyes on our door to keep her away. It worked for a time. Evelyn's gaze hardened. But every few generations, the bride comes back. And she always takes a daughter, unless the debt is paid. Zach swallowed hard. What debt? Evelyn's voice trembled. Blood for blood. One of us must go to her willingly. Suddenly, the lights in the house snapped off. The windows rattled. And from outside, the familiar, melodic whisper floated through the night air. Choose, or I will choose for you. The choice. The entire house trembled as the whisper seemed to seep through the walls. Emma clutched her grandmother's hand while Zach grabbed the flashlight from the counter, flicking it on. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing a trail of muddy footprints leading from the front door to the back window. Prints that hadn't been there moments ago. Evelyn's voice was a ragged whisper. She's inside. The flashlight flickered. From the corner of the living room, a wet drip, drip, drip echoed. Zach swung the light toward the sound. Water pooled beneath the rocking chair, but the ceiling above was dry. Then the rocking chair moved on its own, creaking forward and back, and in that faint light, a figure appeared in the reflection of the window behind them. Lily, soaked barefoot, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, black eyes locked on Emma. Her lips moved slowly. Choose. Emma's voice cracked. Choose what? The forest bride's whisper filled the house, rattling every glass and frame. A daughter for a daughter. Blood for silence. One of you comes, or the town will drown in me. Zach stepped forward, his voice shaking. No, take me instead. The lights burst back on, and every bulb in the house shattered at once, plunging them into darkness. The whisper rose into a screech that rattled their bones. I did not take sons, only daughters. Emma's mind spun. If she didn't go, the bride would take the whole town, one by one. But if she did, there would be no coming back. Then Evelyn's frail hand gripped hers tightly. Emma, I should be the one. This started with me, with our bloodline. I'll go. No, Emma cried. She said a daughter. The basement door slammed open on its own. A cold wind swept through the house, carrying the scent of wet earth and rotting leaves. And then, faintly, from that dark stairwell came the sound of bare feet on concrete. The bride was coming to collect her due. Evelyn whispered, Emma, run. Whatever happens, you must end this. The journal has the way. Before Emma could respond, the whisper came again, right behind her ear. If you do not choose, I will. Into the basement. Emma's heart pounded so loudly, she thought the bride could hear it. The cold wind from the basement carried the smell of damp soil and something older, like the scent of graves. Zach grabbed her arm. We can't go down there. We have to, Emma whispered. If we run, she'll take the whole town. They descended the creaking wooden stairs, one slow step at a time. Each step groaned under their weight, and the beam of Zach's flashlight trembled in his hand. The basement was flooded ankle-deep with murky water. Old furniture floated in the dark, bumping against the walls. Emma's reflection shimmered in the ripples, but it wasn't quite right. Her reflection's eyes were pitch black. Then, from the far corner, the forest bride emerged. She didn't walk. She glided, her dress dripping water, her hair a tangled curtain. The air grew so cold Emma's breath fogged. The bride stopped just inches from her and tilted her head, the way Lily always had. Your family stole my child, she whispered, her voice echoing inside Emma's skull. And now, I take yours. Emma clutched the leather journal, flipping frantically to the last page where her grandmother had told her to look. Around the bride's symbol, faint letters had appeared in the damp. The debt may be broken if the living unearth the dead. Emma gasped. We have to dig her up. The bride's black eyes narrowed. Do that, and set me free. Or refuse, and watch them all drown in my forest. Suddenly, the water in the basement rose violently, slamming against their legs. Emma stumbled as something cold and bony wrapped around her ankle from below. She screamed and kicked, breaking free. Zach shone the flashlight into the water. A pale hand was reaching up from the floor of the basement, from beneath the water, grasping blindly. Emma's voice trembled. She's buried under the house. The bride leaned close, her wet breath chilling Emma's face. Bring her bones to the ash tree, or Echo Ridge will be mine forever. Then, with a deafening splash, the bride and the water vanished, leaving the basement dry, as if nothing had ever happened. Emma and Zach collapsed against the stairs, shivering. Zach whispered, "We have to dig up a grave, and we only have until nightfall." Unearthing the bride. The morning sky over Echo Ridge was a dull, bruised gray. It didn't feel like daylight at all, more like the sun was holding its breath, waiting for the town to fall. Emma and Zach trudged toward the old ash tree deep in the woods, the journal clutched in Emma's hands. According to the final passage, this was the place where the men of Gallows Hollow had buried Eliza Thorne alive. The forest bride's true grave. Every step felt heavier than the last. The forest was silent. No birds, no wind. Only the wet crunch of leaves beneath their boots. When they reached the clearing, Emma froze. The tree was enormous, its roots twisting like the gnarled fingers of a giant hand. Symbols had been carved into the trunk, fresh ones identical to the bride's mark. And at the base of the tree, the earth was wet and black, as if the ground itself had bled. Zach dropped his backpack and pulled out the small shovel he'd stolen from the maintenance shed. "I can't believe I'm saying this, but let's dig up a body." They started to dig. The wet soil clung to their hands and clothes, releasing a foul, sweet odor of decay. After a few minutes, the shovel struck wood that Emma's throat tightened. "That's her coffin." They cleared the dirt until the rotting wooden box was exposed. It was cracked and sagging, like the forest had been trying to swallow it for a century. Carved into the lid was the same circle with two eyes. Zach hesitated. "Once we open this, there's no going back." Emma nodded, hands trembling. Together, they pried open the lid. Inside, Eliza Thorne's skeletal remains lay curled in a fetal position, tangled in the remnants of a shredded white dress. But the skull-to-skull was smiling. A whisper slithered through the clearing, "Free me, or join me." The ground shook violently, dirt spilling into the hole. From the shadows between the trees, figures emerged, half-formed, waterlogged silhouettes of the missing girls from the town's history. Their black eyes fixed on Emma and Zach. Emma forced her trembling hands to reach into the coffin, pulling the brittle bones free. "We have to bring her to the center of the town," she panted. "We have to finish this." But as she lifted the skull, the forest screamed. The ash tree split with a thunderous crack, and a shape began to crawl out from its hollow, long arms dragging through the dirt. The forest bride was coming for what was hers, the bride's pursuit. The hollowed ash tree split wider with a sound like breaking bones. From its center, the forest bride emerged fully, no longer just a whisper or a shadow. Her soaked, shredded gown trailed behind her as she crawled across the roots. On elongated, skeletal hands, her black eyes fixed on Emma. The forest seemed to come alive. Branches creaked and twisted. Leaves hissed like they were whispering her name. The air smelled of wet soil and rot, heavy and suffocating. "Run!" Zach shouted, grabbing Emma's arm. Emma clutched Eliza Thorne's skull against her chest, and they bolted through the forest. Behind them, the bride shrieked, a sound that was neither human nor animal, loud enough to rattle the leaves from the trees. The ground shook with every step they took, and the forest itself seemed to fight against them. Roots shot up from the ground, tried to trip them. Fog thickened, blinding them. Branches tore at their clothes and hair like skeletal fingers. At one point, Emma stumbled over a root and fell, the skull rolling out of her arms. It hit the ground with a dull clatter. She scrambled to grab it, and for a split second, she saw the bride's reflection in a puddle at her feet, smiling, crawling closer, her black eyes shining with hunger. They burst out of the tree lean onto Main Street. The town was in chaos. Street lamps flickered violently. Cars honked as their alarms blared on their own. People were pouring out of their houses, screaming, because fog and water were creeping down every street like the town was sinking into the forest itself. Emma and Zach ran toward the old clock tower in the center of town, the highest point, hoping they could finish the ritual before the bride consumed everything. Suddenly, the bride appeared in the middle of the street, rising from a swirl of fog. Her form towered over them, distorted and dripping, her limbs too long, her head tilting in that impossible, jerky way. "Give me what is mine," she hissed, her voice shaking the windows. "Or I will take them all." Emma raised the skull high, heart hammering. "We're taking you home. We're setting you free." The bride's grin widened, and the entire town went dark. Only the sound of water rushing and the distant toll of the broken clock tower bell filled the night. The final ritual. The town of Echo Ridge was drowned in darkness. No street lamps, no house lights, only the moon filtering through fog and the distant toll of the clock tower's broken bell. Water surged through the streets, lapping at Emma and Zach's knees, carrying leaves and debris like the forest itself was swallowing the town. Emma clutched Eliza Thorne's skull, her hands trembling. She and Zach fought their way up the clock tower steps, the wood slick beneath their boots. From below, the whispers rose into a chorus, hundreds of voices crying, singing, and laughing all at once. At the top, they reached the old belfry. The wind howled through shattered glass, and the entire town stretched below, flooded with fog. In the center of Main Street, the forest bride towered, her form looming and shifting, part woman, part shadow, part rotting root and water. Emma opened the journal, flipping to the last page. The instructions were written in jagged, faded script. The bones must touch the air above the town. The bell must toll once more. Name her and set her free. Emma's breath shook. We have to ring the bell. Zach grabbed the frayed rope and braced himself. Say her name. Loud. Emma lifted the skull high, her voice breaking as she screamed into the night. Eliza Thorne. Be free. The bell tolled, a deep, guttural sound that rolled through the fog. The effect was instant. The forest bride let out a scream that shattered windows across Main Street. Her body convulsed, stretching and twisting as black water gushed from her like smoke and rain combined. The silhouettes of the missing girls appeared in the fog, their eyes black, but their faces peaceful for the first time. One by one, they dissolved into the wind. The ground trembled violently, and the ash tree in the forest could be heard splitting apart with a deafening crack. Is it working? Zach yelled over the roar. But then Emma froze. Down below, the forest bride turned her head toward the clock tower, her black eyes locking on Emma. Even as her body dissolved, she smiled, a slow, knowing curve of her lips. Her voice slithered into Emma's ear despite the distance. Blood for blood, the debt is not paid. Suddenly, a cold hand grabbed Emma's ankle. She looked down. A pale arm was reaching up through the cracks in the wooden floor of the belfry, dripping water. Another hand followed, clawing its way up. The bride was not leaving alone. The last claim. The wooden floor of the clock tower groaned as the pale, dripping hands clawed their way up through the cracks. Emma staggered back, clutching the skull to her chest, her heart hammering so loud it drowned the tolling of the bell. Emma! Zach grabbed her arm, yanking her away as the forest bride's face began to emerge through the boards. Her black eyes stared up at them, and her mouth split into a grin that stretched far too wide, revealing teeth as sharp as glass shards. One more, daughter, the voice hissed from beneath their feet. The whole tower shook violently. Board snapped. Water began to gush up through the gaps, flooding the floor around their boots. Zach slipped, catching himself against the wall, his flashlight clattering into the water. Run! Emma screamed. They bolted toward the spiral staircase, but a root burst through the wall, whipping across the stairs and blocking the exit. The tower was sealing itself like a tomb. The bride's voice rattled the wood. I was promised a daughter, and I take what is owed. Emma's mind raced. The journal had said the debt may be broken if the living unearth the dead. They had done it. They had rung the bell. They had spoken her name. But the forest bride still wanted blood. Her grandmother's words echoed in her head. Blood for blood. One of us must go to her willingly. Emma looked at Zach, soaked and terrified, and realized the truth. The curse would never end with just bones. It needed a sacrifice, The floorboards split open, and the bride rose from the water, her body stretching into a long, serpentine shadow. She towered over Emma, dripping mud and black water, her skeletal fingers reaching out. Zach stepped in front of Emma, shaking but defiant. "If you want her, you have to take me first." The bride paused, tilting her head, her grin widening. "I do not take sons, only daughters." The tower lurched. Nails popped. Somewhere below, a church bell cracked under the weight of the wind. Outside, the entire town seemed to lean toward the clock tower, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Emma squeezed the skull, her knuckles white. She suddenly understood. The bride didn't just want blood. She wanted acknowledgement. She wanted the town to face its crime, and Emma was its last heir. Emma stepped forward, voice trembling but steady. "Then take me, but leave them all alone." The bride froze. The smile softened into something else, recognition, almost sorrow. Slowly, she reached out a hand. Cold, wet, waiting. Emma's fingertips brushed the bride's palm. An entire town screamed. Fog burst upward like a geyser. The clock tower bell shattered, and a wave of black water surged through the streets. Then silence. Only the sound of rain remained. When Zach opened his eyes, the tower was empty. Emma and the forest bride were gone. The morning after, Echo Ridge awoke under a pale, washed-out sky, as if the world itself had been drained of color. The storm was gone. The streets were wet, littered with branches and leaves, but the fog had lifted. For the first time in days, the forest was silent, truly silent. No whispers, no laughter. Zach stumbled out of the clock tower just after dawn, soaked to the bone and shaking. His knuckles were cut, his shoes filled with mud. He had Emma's journal clutched to his chest like it was the last piece of her left. The townspeople were gathered in the square. They had seen the black water vanish like smoke, leaving only puddles. They had heard the final scream that rattled their windows in the night. Sheriff Daniels approached him, wide-eyed. "Son, what happened up there?" Zach opened his mouth, but no words came out. He simply shook his head and whispered, "She's gone." The sheriff's face fell. He didn't need to ask who. By midday, a strange calm fell over Echo Ridge. The missing posters for Lily and the other lost girls were taken down, replaced by bouquets and candles on the courthouse steps. The townspeople knew, without explanation, that the curse had ended, at least for now. But Zach couldn't rest. He returned to the edge of the forest, journal in hand, staring at the ash tree that had birthed the horror. It now stood dead and split, its roots blackened like they had been burned from within. He thought he saw something move among the roots, a glint of pale fabric. He stepped closer and found it, a blue ribbon, damp but clean, tied in a small bough. Emma's ribbon. Zach knelt and whispered, "Thank you." That night, the town held a candlelight vigil. Evelyn Raines sat silently in her wheelchair, staring into the flames, knowing her granddaughter had paid the price that her family had avoided for generations. And in the hush of the night, as Zach walked home past the empty streets, he swore he heard a soft hum rising from the forest. Not a whisper, not a threat, a lullaby. The lullaby in the trees. For a week, Echo Ridge felt like a ghost town. The storm was over, the fog was gone, and life was supposed to return to normal. But no one could forget what they had felt in the night. Zach spent most of his time wandering near the edge of the forest, Emma's leather journal always in his backpack. He couldn't stop thinking about the last thing he had heard, the lullaby drifting from the trees. It was soft, almost tender, like a mother singing to a child, but it carried a weight that froze his blood. One evening, just after sunset, Zach found himself standing by the split ash tree. He crouched to touch the blackened roots, half expecting them to pulse with life. That's when he noticed something carved into the bark, fresh, sharp, and glistening in the fading light. "I'm not gone." Zach staggered back, his pulse thundering in his ears. A branch snapped behind him. He spun around, flashlight in hand, but there was no one there. Only the forest, dark and waiting. Then he heard it. A voice. Zach. It was Emma's voice. He stumbled forward, heart hammering. "Emma." The voice came again, lilting through the trees like a thread of music. Follow. Zack followed the sound deeper into the woods, past mossy trunks and muddy roots, until he reached a small clearing. Moonlight spilled across the ground like silver water, and in the center was a reflection pool, shallow and perfectly still. In the water, he saw Emma's face. She looked alive, beautiful, calm, but her eyes were dark as the night sky, flecked with faint glimmers like stars drowned in ink. Emma. His voice cracked. Her reflection smiled. I kept the town safe, but I am hers now. And she is me. Zack's breath caught. I can get you back. I can. The water shuddered, and Emma's reflection whispered, soft as a kiss. Do not try, or you'll never leave these woods again. Suddenly, the lullaby rose louder all around him, the trees swaying though there was no wind. He stumbled back toward the path, the forest pulsing with the echo of her voice. By the time he broke free of the tree-line, sweat-soaked and trembling, the message was clear. Emma was alive in some way, but she belonged to Echo Ridge now, and the forest bride's lullaby would never stop. Do you want me to continue the cycle of Echo Ridge? Life in Echo Ridge moved on, or at least it pretended to. The mayor reopened the town square. Kids returned to school. Cars passed the old clock tower without slowing down, even though the bell was still shattered and the top floor remained scorched from that night. But every person who had been there, everyone who had felt the forest breathe, knew the truth. Echo Ridge was living on borrowed time. And Zack, he couldn't sleep. Every night, the lullaby returned, sometimes soft, sometimes loud enough to rattle his windows. It wasn't the forest bride anymore. He knew that voice. It was Emma, calling from somewhere between the roots of the forest and the bones of the town. One night, he dreamed of her. She stood in the middle of Main Street, barefoot and wearing the same dress from that last night. Her black-starred eyes glimmered, and she whispered, "It's never over, Zack. The forest always wants someone to remember." He woke drenched in sweat and found muddy footprints across his bedroom floor. They started at the window and ended at his bed. The next morning, Echo Ridge stirred with new unease. Sheriff Daniels came knocking, face pale, hat in hand. "Boy," he said slowly, "we found something at the old ash tree." Zack followed him into the woods. The ash tree, long split and blackened, now bore a fresh carving. The words were sharp, clean, and new. "A daughter for a daughter. Let it sleeps for now." The sheriff swallowed. "I don't know who's been out here, but it wasn't any of us." That night, during the vigil they held for Emma and the others, the air was still. The candles flickered, but did not go out. And for the first time, the townspeople whispered her name like a prayer, not a tragedy. Zack stood apart, staring at the woods. He thought he saw a figure among the trees. A girl, barefoot, smiling softly. Then she raised a finger to her lips. "Shoo!" and vanished into the dark. The cycle of Echo Ridge had not ended. It had only gone quiet. And somewhere beneath the roots, the forest bride and her new daughter were waiting. Years later, the forest watches. 5 years passed. Echo Ridge changed, and it didn't. The cracked bell tower had been repaired, though the bell was never replaced. The town planted a new sapling where the ash tree once stood, calling it a symbol of new beginnings. Children played around it in the daylight, and tourists took photos without knowing the roots of horror buried beneath. But at night, the forest still hummed. Zack Taylor was no longer the quiet boy with a camera. He had left town for college, but he returned often. He couldn't stay away. He'd walk Main Street at dusk, staring at the forest line where the fog seemed to wait like a patient predator. Sometimes, when he closed his eyes, he still heard Emma's lullaby. One October evening, a new family moved into the old Rains house, freshly painted with flower boxes under the windows, as if paint could erase bloodlines. Among them was Sophie Miller, a curious 12-year-old with a habit of wandering where she shouldn't. On their second night in town, Sophie woke to the sound of humming. Soft, sweet, coming from the backyard. She crept to the window. The moon was high, spilling silver over the grass. At the edge of the yard, just beyond the sapling, stood a girl in a white dress. She was barefoot, her hair falling over her face. Sophie blinked. Hello. The girl lifted her head slowly. Her face was pale as bone. Her eyes were black, flecked with tiny stars. Then she smiled and whispered, almost lovingly, Welcome to Echo Ridge. Sophie stumbled back from the window, heart pounding. When she looked again, the yard was empty. Only the saplings swayed in the windless night. The next morning, Sheriff Daniels knocked on Zach's door. Taylor, he said grimly, we've got a problem. The new kid at the Rains place swears she saw a girl in the yard last night. And he held up a photo on his phone. The sapling in the backyard now bore a mark, carved deep into its bark overnight. A circle with two black eyes. Zach closed his eyes. He knew what it meant. The forest bride and Emma were still here, waiting. The last echo of the bride. Autumn settled over Echo Ridge with a quiet that felt wrong, like the forest was holding its breath. The Miller family tried to ignore the strange sounds at night. Soft knocks on the windows, footsteps in the attic, the faint sound of humming when the wind stopped. 12-year-old Sophie Miller, though scared, felt drawn to the forest. The white-dressed girl she had seen that first night, she couldn't get her out of her head. Sometimes, in the corners of mirrors or the reflections in puddles, Sophie thought she saw her own face change, her eyes darkening for a heartbeat, then returning to normal. One late October evening, Sophie followed the humming again. The moon was nearly full. Fog hugged the ground as she stepped barefoot into the backyard. The saplings swayed without wind, and the humming grew louder, almost like a lullaby meant for her alone. Then she saw her, Emma, or the girl who had been Emma. She stood at the edge of the forest, barefoot, white dress rippling as if underwater. Her black-starred eyes watched Sophie with a soft, patient sorrow. Why are you here? Sophie whispered, voice shaking. Emma tilted her head. I keep the town safe, but the forest is lonely. It always needs someone to remember. Sophie shivered. Remember what? Emma smiled faintly. That Echo Ridge was built on silence, and silence always has a price. Behind Emma, shapes moved in the fog, tall, feminine figures in tattered white, their eyes black like hers. The forest bride's daughters, bound to the roots, to the lullaby, to the memory of the town's first betrayal. Sophie backed away, but Emma's voice floated after her, soft and final. One day, you will sing with us. The next morning, the Miller family packed. They told neighbors it was the creaky house and too much forest. But Sophie never spoke about what she had seen. She only glanced at the sapling one last time as they drove away. Its bark now bore 7 symbols, the circle and black eyes, as if the forest had counted its daughters. Years later, Echo Ridge stood quiet again. No more disappearances, no more storms. But sometimes, when the fog rolled in off the hills, travelers swore they heard a soft lullaby drifting through the trees. And if you followed it, if you dared to step beneath the old trees and the blackened roots, you might see a girl in white, smiling with eyes full of night and stars, waiting for Echo Ridge to forget. The end.